It was a moment that no one in the royal circle or the world would forget. Picture this, a private, tense meeting inside the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, where every inch exudes power, history, and expectations. And there he was, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, pale-faced, his hands slightly trembling, as he made what he believed to be a bold, reasonable request, $25 million. Not a trivial sum, not a whim. But in the halls of monarchy, even money carries weight far beyond its numbers. And the response he received would change everything. For decades, the royal family has been a symbol of privilege, tradition, and unspoken codes. But as the world watched Harry grow from a boy in military uniform to a global celebrity, many wondered, did he ever really understand the rules of the institution he was born into? Was this request a calculated move, a desperate plea, or a reckless overreach? Today, we dive deep into a story that's been whispered behind closed doors, leaked in hushed rumors, and splashed across headlines with each new twist. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Harry's life outside the palace walls has always been a balancing act between freedom and expectation. On one hand, he and Meghan Markle carved out a life in America, with multi-million-dollar media deals, philanthropic ventures, and the promise of independence. On the other, the pull of family, tradition, and public scrutiny never fully releases its grip. So when Harry asked for $25 million from King Charles, he believed it was a transaction both fair and justified. He had appearances to maintain, charities to fund, and a life of comfort that had become, in his mind, almost a necessity. But money in the royal family is never just money. Each pound, each decision, carries implications, social, political, and emotional. A denial is not just financial, it's symbolic. And for Harry, that denial would feel like a public shaming, a subtle message that despite his titles, accomplishments, and fame, he was still bound by invisible chains of expectation. The first whispers came from the palace staff. The Duke has requested funds again. One aide murmured to another, the words barely above a whisper, yet heavy with implication. The murmurs traveled quickly, leaping from staff quarters to aides, and eventually to the very ears of King Charles himself. The king, known for his composed demeanor but also his meticulous attention to protocol, did not react in haste. He considered the request, weighed its potential consequences, and remembered the many precedents that defined his reign. And then he made a decision that would ripple through royal circles and shock the public when it leaked. No. A single, definitive, unyielding denial. Not a compromise, not a partial agreement, not a "we'll discuss later." Just no. Imagine the scene. Harry, standing in a room that's seen centuries of negotiation, alliance building, and ceremonial grandeur, feeling the world tilt beneath him. His confidence wavered. His vision of smooth, effortless acquisition of wealth, earned through fame, yes, but expected through entitlement, shattered. The color drained from his face. And yet, this was only the beginning. The news didn't stay behind palace walls for long. Word leaked, as it always does in the corridors of power. Trusted aides whispered to journalists, who whispered to their networks. Social media erupted. Memes, tweets, and hot takes spread like wildfire. The story became more than just a denial. It became a spectacle, a public trial of character, a clash between expectation and reality. How could a prince, a man born into privilege, be turned away so completely? But there was more to the story than mere denial. Behind the scenes, tension simmered. Advisors debated Harry's next move. Meghan, poised and strategic, weighed in with her perspective, her influence undeniable, yet sometimes contentious. The royal family, meanwhile, prepared for the inevitable fallout. The media storm, the public judgment, the whispers of scandal that could stain reputations and reignite old resentments. For Harry, the stakes were deeply personal. This was not merely about $25 million. It was about independence, recognition, and perhaps validation in a world that had often scrutinized and criticized him. It was a test of his own ability to navigate the treacherous waters between private desires and public responsibilities. Could he pivot, adapt, or accept defeat gracefully? Or would this denial ignite a chain reaction that would expose deeper fissures within his relationships, his finances, and his very identity? And then there's the question the public would soon ask, the one that keeps fans and critics equally captivated. Why now? Why make such a bold request at this particular moment, when tensions were already high and the world's gaze was firmly fixed on him? Some speculate it was desperation. Others claim strategy. Some say it was a calculated move meant to force the hand of the monarchy. And the truth? Only those in the room know for certain, and even they might be hiding pieces of the puzzle. What happened next would unfold like a high-stakes drama. Every phone call, every email, every private meeting held the potential for revelation or disaster. And as the public waited, Harry's world grew increasingly complicated, the lines between personal desire and public expectation blurring with each passing hour. Now, think about it from King Charles's perspective. The king must balance tradition, responsibility, and optics. Granting the request might have been seen as favoritism, a dangerous precedent that could unsettle the delicate balance of royal finances. Denying it, however, risks familial tension, emotional backlash, and perhaps even public relations fallout. The stakes were enormous, and the decision would have consequences far beyond the confines of the palace walls. As the denial sank in, Harry faced a moment of reckoning. How do you reconcile entitlement with limitation? Fame with obligation? Freedom with duty? His next steps, his reactions, and the choices he made in the immediate aftermath would set the tone for the months and years to come. And for the rest of us watching, it was a story that promised scandal, drama, and revelations that could redefine what we thought we knew about the modern monarchy. But this is only the beginning. Behind closed doors, conversations crackled with tension. Secret meetings took place, plans were whispered in corridors, and every interaction carried the weight of unspoken consequences. Harry was about to discover that a simple no could trigger a cascade of events that no amount of fame or fortune could fully contain. And the world? We were about to watch it all unfold. What exactly happened after that fateful denial? How did Harry handle the emotional blow, the public scrutiny, and the private pressure? And most importantly, what twists would emerge in the days that followed? Twists that no one could have predicted? It all started with a bold, almost audacious idea. Picture this: Prince Harry, sitting in his private study, surrounded by the trappings of his life in California. Artwork on the walls, sleek leather furniture, and the subtle hum of security and staff just beyond the room. He had built a life that many would envy, yet in his mind, something was missing. And that something, as shocking as it might seem to the outside world, had a price tag: $25 million. The request itself was more than just a financial move. It was a statement, a declaration of independence, and, some would argue, a challenge to the very system that had shaped him since birth. But what motivated him to make such a request? Was it lifestyle, business ventures, or something more personal, more symbolic, a demand for recognition, a plea for validation? Harry had always been accustomed to the world's attention. From his military service to global charitable work, and then to his high-profile marriage to Meghan Markle, he had been both scrutinized and celebrated. Yet fame, as he would come to realize, does not always equate to freedom. In fact, the very privileges he enjoyed often came with invisible shackles. Every move, every public appearance, every word he spoke was weighed, analyzed, and judged. The $25 million request was carefully calculated, or so he thought. It wasn't an offhand demand or a spur-of-the-moment whim. It was the result of hours of consideration, consultation with advisors, and strategic planning. Harry believed he had the leverage: media deals, book contracts, speaking engagements, and the undeniable public fascination with the royal family. Yet, in the world of royalty, leverage isn't measured in dollars alone. It is measured in tradition, loyalty, and precedent. As he drafted the initial letter to King Charles, Harry's mind raced. Each word had to strike the perfect balance between confidence and respect, assertiveness and humility. He needed to convey the importance of the request without sounding entitled, urgent without seeming desperate. Every sentence was meticulously chosen, every paragraph a reflection of both his desires and his understanding, or misunderstanding, of royal protocol. But beyond the mechanics of the letter, there was an emotional undertone. Harry felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him, not from his father alone, but from the world at large. He had stepped away from the royal family in pursuit of autonomy. Yet autonomy came with a price he was only beginning to understand. The request for $25 million was, in part, an attempt to bridge that gap between independence and necessity. A bridge he hoped King Charles would allow him to cross. When the letter was finally delivered, the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace shifted. The king, known for his composure and deliberation, read the request with a measured gaze. Advisors, aides, and senior staff watched silently, knowing that the implications of this request would ripple far beyond the walls of the palace. To grant it could be seen as favoritism, setting a precedent that might encourage similar requests in the future. To deny it could risk personal tension, familial discord, and public speculation. But Harry was not unaware of these risks. He had weighed them, calculated them, and ultimately decided that the potential reward outweighed the danger. The $25 million represented more than money. It was freedom, validation, and perhaps even a sense of justice in his eyes. Yet, as the first reactions began to filter back through the palace channels, it became clear that the world Harry thought he could control was far less predictable than he had imagined. What came next was a delicate dance of negotiation and anticipation. Harry waited, analyzing every response, every nuance, every pause. And then the first message arrived, subtle but unmistakable in its implication. The king was considering the request, but not in the way Harry hoped. Inside Harry's mind, a storm was brewing. He imagined different scenarios, rehearsed arguments, and contemplated counteroffers. He envisioned a world where the request was granted, where he could maintain his lifestyle and pursue his projects without restriction. Yet the reality of royal decision-making was far more rigid than his calculations accounted for. As hours turned into days, the tension escalated. Every message from the palace, every conversation with advisors, seemed to carry double meaning. Harry began to feel the pressure mounting, not just financial, but emotional, social, and psychological. The stakes were higher than ever, and the world outside was watching, even if they didn't yet know the specifics. This was more than a financial transaction. It was a test of character, a measure of influence, and a reflection of the complex dynamics between father and son. Harry's bold request had set in motion a chain of events that no one could fully anticipate, and with each passing moment, the anticipation grew more intense. The tension reached its peak when an initial response from the king hinted at the possibility of a partial concession, but Harry knew better than to trust such signals. In the corridors of power, words were chosen carefully, and meaning was often hidden between the lines. He understood that any misstep could alter the course of his life and the perception of him in the eyes of the public forever. And yet, even as the initial shock wore off, Harry could not ignore the gnawing sense of uncertainty. The stakes were higher than he had anticipated, the outcome more unpredictable, and the consequences potentially devastating. What he did not know, what no one could have predicted, was how swiftly the denial would come, how absolute it would be, and how it would ripple through every corner of his personal and public life. The bold request, intended as a bridge to independence, was about to collide head-on with tradition, authority, and the unyielding rules of the monarchy. And when that collision occurred, the shockwaves would extend far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace, touching advisors, allies, and the public in ways that would leave everyone questioning. How could a prince, so privileged and powerful, be turned away so completely? The moment the request landed on King Charles's desk, the palace seemed to shift. It was as though the air itself had thickened, every gold-trimmed wall, an ornate portrait bearing silent witness to a decision that could either bridge or deepen a rift within the family. $25 million. A figure so substantial it demanded attention. And yet, in the royal world, it was never just about the numbers. Every request, every dollar, carried a weight of symbolism, precedent, and potential scandal. King Charles, a man accustomed to scrutiny and responsibility, did not react impulsively. His life had been shaped by decades of public service, tradition, and a careful balancing act between duty and family. He knew the implications of granting Harry's request. It could be perceived as favoritism, a dangerous signal to other members of the family, or worse, an admission that titles and public recognition alone were insufficient for his youngest son. But denying it outright? That too carried risk. Family tension, public speculation, and potential media storms were all very real consequences. As he read the letter, the king's mind wandered to the larger picture. Harry had made a life outside the United Kingdom, in a world that blurred celebrity with philanthropy, fame with influence. Money in that world flowed differently, expectations were different, and stakes felt larger. But the monarchy operated on principle, precedent, and hierarchy. To bend these rules, even for a son, was not a decision to be taken lightly. The advisors in the room waited, a tense silence settling over them. Every gesture, every exhalation, seemed amplified. The king's face remained calm, neutral, yet his mind was far from still. He considered previous requests, past generosity, and the message that any response would send both inside and outside the palace. Here was a young man, born into privilege, asking for a sum that could rival the net worth of small nations, and yet expecting no resistance. The first official response came in the form of a carefully worded letter, delivered through the proper channels. It acknowledged the request with respect, outlined the complexities involved, and promised a considered response. On the surface, it seemed diplomatic, even reasonable. But Harry, reading between the lines, could feel the edge of hesitation. The words were polite, but the tone suggested an invisible wall, a subtle signal that approval was far from guaranteed. And then the private conversation happened. King Charles, ever the strategist, summoned Harry to discuss the matter in person. The meeting was short, deliberate, and intensely private. Inside the ornate room, the atmosphere was electric with unspoken tension. Advisors lingered at the threshold, aware that their presence could tip the delicate balance of the discussion. Every detail mattered: the placement of furniture, the choice of words, even the subtlest expressions. Harry entered with a sense of expectation, believing that his reasoning, charm, and logic would prevail. He outlined his plans, his needs, his vision for how the money would be used. He spoke of independence, of charitable projects, of sustaining a lifestyle that had become almost synonymous with his public image. Each word was measured, persuasive, and delivered with the conviction of someone accustomed to being heard. But King Charles remained unmoved. His responses were measured, precise, and carefully constructed. He emphasized principles, precedent, and the responsibility of stewardship. He reminded Harry that independence came not just from money, but from personal discipline, accountability, and respect for the institutions that had shaped him. There was no harshness, no anger, but an unwavering firmness that left no room for negotiation. As the discussion progressed, the emotional stakes rose. Harry's face, usually composed, began to pale, a subtle but unmistakable reflection of rising tension and unspoken frustration. The reality of the denial began to sink in. This was not a "we'll see," or "maybe later." This was an unequivocal, final decision. The king's tone, calm yet resolute, left no doubt. $25 million would not be granted. Outside the room, whispers circulated among staff and aides. The palace, which often operated on discretion and silence, was now charged with anticipation. Rumors of the meeting's outcome began to leak, subtle hints that would later blossom into full-blown media speculation. And while Harry tried to maintain composure, the emotional undercurrent was unmistakable. A denial of this magnitude was more than a financial blow. It was a personal, public, and symbolic statement. For Harry, the implications were immediate. The plans he had meticulously crafted, the lifestyle, the ventures, the independence, now faced an unexpected obstacle. He felt the weight of both the king's authority and the expectations of the world outside. And yet, he was far from defeated. His mind raced, considering alternative strategies, possible allies, and potential backchannels. The denial was not the end. It was the beginning of a more complex, more dramatic unfolding of events. Meanwhile, King Charles returned to his daily duties, aware that the ripple effects of his decision would extend far beyond that private meeting. Advisors discussed the ramifications, both practical and political. The public, though unaware of the full details, would eventually sense the tension, the shift in family dynamics, and the story of a prince denied his request would soon dominate headlines. And the media? They were always watching, always analyzing, always ready to amplify even the smallest hints of discord. Every gesture, every statement, every facial expression would be dissected, turned into speculation, and spread across the globe. Harry's pale face, the king's unwavering calm, the subtle tension in the room, all would become fodder for public consumption. But perhaps the most consequential aspect of the denial was the emotional undercurrent. Harry felt something deeper than frustration or embarrassment. There was a sting of rejection, a subtle sense of betrayal, and a dawning realization that privilege, fame, and birthright did not guarantee compliance, even from a father. It was a lesson in power, authority, and the unyielding nature of monarchy, a lesson that would shape his actions in the days and months to come. As Harry left the meeting, the corridors of Buckingham Palace seemed heavier, almost oppressive. Each step echoed with the weight of unspoken tension. Each glance carried the knowledge that the world was about to witness the fallout. And though he tried to mask his emotions, the denial had left an indelible mark, setting the stage for a series of events that would test not only his resolve, but his understanding of family, duty, and self-reliance. What happened next? How Harry responded, who he turned to, and what strategies he considered in the wake of such a devastating denial, would not only surprise the public, but also expose fissures in the royal family that had long remained hidden. The moment Harry stepped away from that tense meeting with King Charles, he felt the weight of the denial pressing down on him like a physical force. The air seemed heavier, the world suddenly more constricting. He had imagined that a calm, reasoned discussion would yield results, that his status, history, and vision would be enough to persuade the king. But the reality was starkly different. $25 million was firmly denied. Every instinct in him screamed to act, to negotiate, to find a way to turn this situation to his favor. And there was only one person he trusted more than anyone in the world, Meghan Markle. As he called her, the conversation carried urgency, tension, and that familiar undercurrent of partnership. Meghan, poised and strategic, was the one person who could process this situation with both clarity and emotional intelligence. She had always understood the intricate balance of power, media optics, and personal influence, and she had never shied away from wielding her influence when necessary. "Harry, breathe," she said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the chaos in his mind. "We need to approach this carefully. Money isn't just money. It's leverage, it's optics, it's strategy. You can't let frustration dictate your next move." Harry listened, trying to absorb her words while the sting of rejection still lingered. It wasn't just the denial itself. It was the way it had been delivered, the firmness of it, the implication that no amount of pleading, reasoning, or planning could override the king's decision. Meghan knew this and immediately began outlining a path forward. First, she suggested they analyze the denial strategically. Why had the king refused? What was at stake for the monarchy? What messages could granting the request send, and what precedent could it establish? Meghan reminded Harry that appearances mattered as much as the money itself. Any public misstep could become fodder for critics, tabloids, and social media, undermining their credibility and their carefully cultivated public image. Next, she advised on private negotiations. "We need allies," she said. "Not just public sympathy, not just media narratives. People who have influence behind the scenes. Advisors, friends of the family, even charitable contacts who can subtly sway opinions. But we do this quietly. No leaks, no drama." Harry, still grappling with a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and anger, absorbed her counsel. Meghan had always been the more pragmatic, calculating half of their partnership, balancing his impulsive tendencies with strategic foresight. She had a history of navigating complex situations, media scrutiny, public criticism, and royal protocol, and now she was guiding him through one of the most critical personal and financial moments of his life. Yet, even with her guidance, the emotional toll was undeniable. Harry felt the sting of rejection from his father more deeply than he had expected. This wasn't just a denied request, it was a subtle, almost invisible reprimand. In the royal hierarchy, even a grown son asking for money could be seen as overstepping boundaries. Meghan, perceptive as ever, recognized the emotional danger. She spoke with a mixture of empathy and firmness, encouraging him to channel his feelings into strategy rather than reaction. They spent hours discussing potential paths forward. Meghan suggested leveraging media narratives in subtle ways, strategically timed interviews, charitable appearances, and public messaging that highlighted independence and philanthropy without directly confronting the denial. She encouraged him to focus on building his own financial stability, reinforcing the idea that autonomy was achievable even without the king's approval. But she also warned about the risks. "Every move we make will be analyzed," she said. "Every statement, every appearance, every donation, it will all be scrutinized. You have to think 3 steps ahead. The palace is not forgiving of mistakes, and the public is even less so." Harry nodded, realizing that Meghan's counsel was not just practical. It was essential. He had entered this situation expecting a straightforward negotiation, perhaps a partial concession, or at least a compromise. What he faced instead was a complex web of family dynamics, public perception, and emotional stakes that could not be simplified into a single financial transaction. As the day wore on, Meghan continued to guide him, mapping out strategies for both private discussions and potential public engagement. She emphasized patience, timing, and the careful use of influence. But beneath the strategy was also a deeper, more personal layer, a reminder that they were partners, navigating not just money and optics, but loyalty, love, and shared ambition. Yet, even with this guidance, Harry's mind wandered to contingency plans. What if private negotiation failed? What if public messaging backfired? What if the denial sparked more tension than they could handle? Meghan's advice was clear. Control what you can, anticipate what you can't, and always remain one step ahead. Their conversation ended with a shared understanding. The denial was not the end, but a pivotal moment that would test not just their financial plans, but their relationship, their influence, and their ability to navigate one of the most scrutinized families in the world. It was a test of strategy, patience, and emotional resilience. And as night fell over their Californian home, Harry felt a mixture of reassurance and uncertainty. Meghan's counsel had provided clarity, but the path forward was anything but simple. The stakes were high, the rules complex, and the consequences potentially explosive. Every step, every decision, every move would carry weight, both personal and public. The next step was inevitable, a private, face-to-face meeting with King Charles. This wasn't a casual discussion. It wasn't a phone call or a letter that could be ignored or delayed. It was a confrontation wrapped in protocol and ceremony, where every gesture, glance, and word carried consequences. The corridors of Buckingham Palace seemed longer that day, echoing with the weight of history, expectation, and tension. Harry's footsteps felt heavier with each step toward the room where his fate would, for all practical purposes, be decided. As he entered, the atmosphere was immediately charged. The ornate furnishings, gilded moldings, and portraits of ancestors who had shaped history all seemed to loom over him, as if silently judging. Advisors lingered discreetly at the threshold, their presence both reassuring and suffocating. They were witnesses to this rare and delicate moment, yet even they knew that the most significant interactions would occur between father and son, without intermediaries, without filters. Harry attempted to project calm. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, running through potential arguments, anticipating objections, and preparing counterpoints. But rehearsals could never capture the tension of standing in front of a man whose authority extended far beyond wealth or fame. King Charles's reputation for composure, decisiveness, and sharp observation made the room feel like a crucible, testing Harry's resolve and his ability to navigate the subtle currents of royal negotiation. The conversation began formally, with pleasantries and measured words. Yet beneath the surface, every statement was loaded. Harry outlined his intentions once more, how the funds would be used, the projects he intended to fund, the responsibilities he believed justified the request. He spoke with conviction, emphasizing independence and strategic purpose. Each word was deliberate, chosen to persuade, appeal, and assert his position without overtly challenging the king's authority. But King Charles remained unmoved. His responses were precise, calm, and unwavering, each one a reminder that tradition and precedent mattered more than urgency or desire. He acknowledged Harry's goals and contributions, but he framed the discussion around principles, responsibility, and the long-term implications of granting such a request. There was no anger, no sarcasm, just an unshakable firmness that left no room for negotiation. Harry's emotional state shifted. The first signs were subtle. A tightening of his jaw, a quickened pulse, a slight pale hue creeping across his face. As the discussion deepened, his frustration grew. He had believed that reasoning, charm, and the weight of his accomplishments would be enough. Now, he realized that even privilege had limits, and that the very principles he had been raised to respect could act as barriers to his desires. Every point Harry raised was countered, not with confrontation, but with strategic calm. King Charles reminded him of the monarchy's responsibilities, to the public, to the institution, and to precedent. Every concession Harry hoped for was subtly redirected, every argument deflected by a combination of authority and measured reasoning. It was as if he were trying to navigate a storm by steering against a current that was both invisible and unyielding. The tension in the room was palpable. Advisors could sense it, noting the slight tremors in Harry's hands, the subtle shift in posture, and the pale cast of his face, a reflection of growing emotional strain. The dialogue, while formal and respectful, carried the weight of personal disappointment. Denial, after all, was rarely just about money. It was a lesson in authority, expectations, and the sometimes harsh realities of familial hierarchy. Harry tried to appeal to personal connection, to shared history, to the bond of father and son. Yet the king remained steadfast, balancing empathy with principle. He acknowledged the emotional aspect, yet made it clear that the decision was based on far-reaching considerations beyond sentiment. Money, legacy, and precedent outweighed even familial bonds in this particular instance. The conversation stretched on, hours seeming to pass in minutes. Each statement, each pause, was amplified by the intensity of the moment. Harry realized that he was not merely negotiating for funds. He was confronting the very structures that had defined his life. Independence, privilege, public perception. None of these could override the deeply embedded protocols and responsibilities that governed the monarchy. By the end of the meeting, the outcome was unmistakable. There would be no $25 million. Not now, not later, not partially. The denial was final, unequivocal, and deliberate. For Harry, the implications were profound. This wasn't just a financial setback. It was a public and private reckoning, a moment that would shape his decisions, strategies, and relationships moving forward. As he left the room, the weight of the denial pressed down with unprecedented force. The corridors of the palace, once familiar and reassuring, now felt oppressive. Every glance from an aide, every whisper in the hall seemed to underscore the gravity of what had just occurred. Harry's mind raced, considering alternatives, strategies, and potential allies. How could he move forward in the wake of such a decisive rejection? The public, still unaware of the exact details, would soon sense that something significant had occurred. Whispers of the meeting, subtle leaks, and the eventual media coverage would amplify the drama. And yet, behind the scenes, far more was happening. Advisors were already assessing the fallout. Meghan was preparing counsel, and the family was bracing for the inevitable ripple effects of this confrontation. Harry, though frustrated and pale, began to understand a critical lesson. In the monarchy, even the most audacious requests are constrained by rules, tradition, and authority. And as he stepped into the next phase of navigating this denial, he knew that strategy, timing, and influence would matter more than ever. Every move from this point forward would be critical, and the world was watching, ready to dissect and judge each step. The shock of the private meeting didn't fully hit Harry until he returned to his personal quarters. In that quiet space, away from advisors, cameras, and ceremonial walls, the denial landed like a physical blow. $25 million. Refused, outright, final. Every carefully laid plan, every envisioned scenario of independence, felt suddenly fragile, precarious, and, in many ways, impossible. The reality was undeniable. The king's decision was absolute, leaving Harry to confront consequences far beyond finances. The emotional toll was immediate. Harry's pulse raced, his thoughts spiraling between disbelief and frustration. He had believed that reasoning, persuasion, and the weight of his accomplishments would secure at least partial approval. Yet the denial was total, a stark reminder that even privilege has limits, and even a prince can be told no. Meghan's earlier counsel echoed in his mind. The denial was not personal, it was strategic, grounded in principle, precedent, and the monarchy's long-term stability. Still, understanding this did little to ease the sting. The first ripple of the denial's impact appeared in Harry's interactions with his inner circle. Advisors, who had been cautiously optimistic about potential outcomes, now found themselves navigating a delicate web of emotions and strategy. Private conversations became more tense, more urgent, as Harry sought alternatives, considered contingencies, and wrestled with a sense of betrayal he couldn't entirely shake. The denial was not just a financial setback. It was a challenge to his independence, his autonomy, and his very perception of power. Outside his immediate circle, the palace began preparing for fallout. A decision of this magnitude, once leaked or interpreted by the press, would inevitably become a story that could dominate headlines. Advisors debated language, phrasing, and timing, fully aware that even subtle missteps could ignite speculation, rumor, and scandal. Every gesture, every conversation, every public appearance would be scrutinized with relentless intensity. And in Harry's mind, the looming presence of global media amplified the weight of personal disappointment, transforming it into a potential public spectacle. Harry's emotions shifted between determination and disbelief. Determination, because he had faced setbacks before and knew he could navigate challenges with strategic action. Disbelief, because he had underestimated the rigidity of royal authority and the enduring nature of precedent. It was a lesson in humility, perhaps, but one laced with frustration, self-doubt, and, at times, simmering anger. The denial had stripped away certainty, leaving him vulnerable to criticism from both inside and outside the family. In these private hours, Harry also reflected on the symbolism embedded in the king's refusal. Money, he realized, was never just money in the royal context. It was a statement of power, influence, and expectation. Denying the request was more than a fiscal decision. It was a message about authority, boundaries, and the balance of privilege. It was a subtle, yet profound, reminder that independence requires more than desire. It requires resilience, resourcefulness, and sometimes, acceptance of limitations. The denial also prompted strategic thinking. Harry began exploring avenues to secure autonomy without the king's financial support. Conversations with Meghan became more frequent, more tactical, as they considered media ventures, business opportunities, and philanthropic projects that could sustain their lifestyle and ambitions. Every decision now required careful calculation, weighing potential gains against exposure, risk, and public perception. As he navigated these complex dynamics, Harry felt the pressure mounting. The denial was public in its implications, even if the details remained private. Rumors of tension, speculation about family dynamics, and subtle hints in media reports would inevitably shape narratives. How would the public perceive him? How would his supporters react? How would critics exploit perceived weakness or entitlement? Each question added layers of urgency and complexity to an already fraught situation. Yet, despite the emotional blow, Harry remained resilient. The denial, while painful, also revealed opportunities. It forced him to confront the reality of autonomy, to recognize that reliance on family wealth was no longer guaranteed, and to develop strategies that balanced ambition with prudence. It was a test of character, endurance, and strategic thinking, one that would define his next moves in both personal and public spheres. Meanwhile, within the palace, the decision had reverberations of its own. Staff and aides were quietly observing the implications, noting subtle tensions in interactions, and preparing for questions that would inevitably arise from media scrutiny. Family members, aware of the situation, were likely monitoring the response with a mix of curiosity, concern, and, perhaps, judgment. Every decision, every emotional reaction, every strategic move would carry significance far beyond the immediate financial matter. Harry's inner circle worked tirelessly to help him process the denial and develop next steps. Advisors emphasized caution, timing, and messaging. Meghan continued to provide counsel, blending empathy with strategic foresight. They discussed possible avenues for funding, potential partnerships, and ways to sustain influence without compromising their independence or public image. Every discussion underscored a single truth: the denial was not an end. It was a pivot point, demanding agility, foresight, and resilience. Despite the careful planning, the emotional impact was unavoidable. Harry grappled with disappointment, frustration, and the subtle sting of rejection from his father, a figure whose approval had always carried profound significance. The denial challenged not only his financial plans, but his sense of autonomy, identity, and family relationships. It was a moment that crystallized the tension between desire and limitation, expectation and reality, public perception and private struggle. And then came the whispers. From staff, aides, and later the media, subtle hints of the denial began to surface. Observers noted tension in appearances, cautious phrasing in interviews, and uncharacteristic restraint in statements. The world, always attuned to royal narratives, began piecing together clues. Speculation swirled, and Harry realized that the denial would not remain private for long. The emotional impact was now intertwined with public scrutiny, magnifying both stakes and consequences. Harry's resilience, however, remained intact. He knew that setbacks were part of life, even for someone in his position. The denial had exposed vulnerabilities, yes, but it had also revealed opportunities. Opportunities to innovate, to strategize, and to assert independence without reliance on royal largesse. Every choice from this point forward would be critical, shaping perceptions, relationships, and potential ventures. It began with subtle hints. Journalists noticed a change in Harry's public appearances: slightly paler complexion, a tension in his posture, brief pauses in interviews where confidence usually flowed effortlessly. Observers on social media began speculating, picking apart every photo, every video, looking for signs of tension between father and son. It didn't take long for the rumor mill to churn into full-blown stories. Headlines emerged. Royal rift deepens. Prince Harry denied millions by King Charles. Palace tension. Duke of Sussex faces financial snub. Each headline amplified the story, feeding the curiosity of millions and setting off a cascade of media frenzy across print, online, and broadcast outlets. Harry and Meghan had always known the media could be both an ally and an adversary. They understood that narrative controlled perception, that timing and tone could either protect or destroy reputations. But the speed and ferocity of coverage in this instance were staggering. Every article, every segment, every tweet seemed designed to provoke emotion, spark debate, and generate clicks. The media frenzy was no longer just reporting, it was shaping the narrative, influencing public perception, and magnifying every tension. The couple's advisors worked feverishly to manage the fallout. Statements had to be crafted with precision, carefully balancing transparency, dignity, and strategy. Too much information risked inflaming the story, too little risked speculation running unchecked. Every word, every public appearance, every social media post was scrutinized, analyzed, and often misinterpreted. Harry, already grappling with emotional strain from the denial itself, now faced the additional pressure of controlling a narrative that seemed to spiral beyond his influence. Social media, of course, was its own beast. Within minutes, memes, commentary threads, and viral videos emerged, dissecting Harry's expressions, questioning his behavior, and speculating on the reasons behind the denial. Supporters rallied, emphasizing empathy, independence, and the unfairness of the situation. Critics attacked, framing the request as entitlement, hypocrisy, or mismanagement. Every reaction was magnified, every opinion amplified. It was a digital wildfire that refused to be contained. Television networks joined in, creating panel discussions and debates. Royal experts and commentators dissected every angle: the king's motivations, Harry's strategy, Meghan's counsel, and the broader implications for the monarchy. Each segment presented a mix of analysis, speculation, and dramatic framing, fueling the frenzy further. The story was no longer just about money. It was about family, power, tradition, and public perception. Even international media picked up the thread. Stories from the United States, Europe, and beyond framed the denial as a clash between old-world tradition and modern expectations. Analysts debated whether the monarchy could accommodate independent-minded royals in an era dominated by celebrity, media scrutiny, and public fascination. The story became not just about Harry and Charles, but about the very nature of royalty in a globalized, connected world. For Harry and Meghan, the media frenzy presented both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, it amplified scrutiny, forced them into defensive posture, and exposed every misstep to public criticism. On the other hand, it created an arena to assert influence, share their perspective, and craft a narrative that highlighted resilience, independence, and strategic foresight. Every press release, every interview, and every public appearance became a carefully orchestrated move in a high-stakes game of perception and influence. The frenzy also had personal consequences. Harry, already emotionally strained by the denial, now faced a global audience interpreting, judging, and commenting on his every action. Sleep became more difficult, pressure intensified, and every interaction carried heightened significance. Meghan, meanwhile, played a critical role in maintaining composure, offering counsel, and coordinating strategy. Her presence was both stabilizing and strategic, reinforcing the partnership that had become central to navigating this crisis. Amid the chaos, advisors emphasized the importance of timing, framing, and messaging. Every statement had to be crafted with precision, every public appearance calculated to reinforce narrative control. Even small details, a glance, a tone, a pause, could be interpreted and magnified, altering public perception in ways that were difficult to predict. The media frenzy was relentless, unforgiving, and always ready to exploit the slightest vulnerability. The public, captivated by the unfolding drama, eagerly consumed every update. Forums, comment sections, and social media threads buzzed with analysis, speculation, and debate. Supporters expressed outrage at the perceived injustice, critics reveled in scandal, and casual observers watched, enthralled, as a private family matter became a global spectacle. The story transcended money, morphing into a narrative about power, loyalty, and the clash between tradition and modernity. And yet, despite the relentless coverage, the most significant developments remained behind closed doors. While the world speculated, Harry and Meghan were strategizing, planning, and considering their next moves. Private conversations, alternative funding strategies, and careful messaging were all part of a broader effort to regain control, assert independence, and navigate the intense scrutiny. The media frenzy was a storm to weather, not a battlefield to fight directly. But every step taken within that storm would carry consequences. As the hours turned to days, the frenzy intensified. Each new article, tweet, or broadcast segment built upon the last, creating a sense of momentum, urgency, and drama. Public fascination peaked, global audiences weighed in, and the palace, advisors, and the couple themselves were drawn deeper into a narrative that was both unpredictable and unrelenting. And through it all, Harry realized a crucial truth. The denial of $25 million had ignited far more than financial tension. It had sparked a chain reaction, emotional, familial, and public, that no amount of preparation could fully contain. The media frenzy was only the beginning, the first wave of a larger story that would continue to evolve, escalate, and shock both the family and the world. In the aftermath of the denial and the growing media frenzy, Harry and Meghan faced a stark reality. Independence, influence, and lifestyle now required meticulous planning, strategic foresight, and creative maneuvering. The $25 million request had been more than just a financial appeal. It was a symbol of autonomy, a bridge to projects, lifestyle, and public endeavors that depended on resources. With the royal refusal, the couple had to rethink everything, and fast. They began with a comprehensive audit of their financial landscape. Advisors, accountants, and strategic consultants were brought in to evaluate every asset, every investment, and every revenue stream. Harry's existing contracts, speaking engagements, book deals, and media appearances were scrutinized for scalability and potential leverage. Meghan's media ventures, philanthropic foundations, and brand partnerships were examined for growth opportunities, cross-collaboration potential, and international reach. It wasn't simply about replacing royal funds. It was about constructing an empire that could sustain influence, lifestyle, and future ambitions. Meghan, ever strategic, became the architect of this plan. She emphasized diversification, risk management, and media optics. Every venture had to be sustainable, socially resonant, and publicly defensible. She insisted on a balance. High-profile projects that showcased influence and philanthropic impact, paired with low-profile, high-revenue endeavors that would provide financial stability away from the relentless media gaze. It was a careful calculus of visibility and discretion, ambition and prudence. Harry, while initially emotionally raw from the denial, quickly pivoted into strategic action. He reviewed media contracts, exploring renegotiations, exclusivity deals, and timing of publications to maximize both impact and revenue. Speaking engagements were scheduled with an eye toward public perception, philanthropic alignment, and international exposure. Every move was meticulously planned to signal independence, resilience, and credibility without appearing reactive or desperate. The couple also explored joint ventures and partnerships. High-profile collaborations were considered not just for revenue, but for strategic positioning. They evaluated international brands, socially responsible companies, and media organizations that aligned with their public image. The goal was clear: create financial independence that didn't rely on royal largesse, while also maintaining control over narrative, influence, and personal brand. Philanthropy became a strategic tool. Harry and Meghan understood that charitable work could serve multiple purposes, fulfilling personal passions, building credibility, and reinforcing a public narrative of altruism and leadership. Projects were carefully selected for visibility, impact, and narrative potential. Each initiative was a calculated statement. Independence was possible, influence could be sustained, and personal ambition could coexist with social responsibility. Yet, amid strategic planning, the emotional undertone remained. Harry wrestled with the implications of the denial on a personal level. Financial independence was one thing, but emotional resilience, public perception, and familial relationships were another. Meghan's guidance emphasized control, foresight, and composure. She reminded Harry that every strategy, no matter how brilliant, could be undermined if emotion dictated decision-making or if public messaging faltered. The couple also considered potential countermoves. If the denial became a persistent point of tension, they could explore subtle avenues for negotiation, leveraging advisors, allies, and media relationships to create leverage without overt confrontation. They discussed timing, approach, and messaging, ensuring that any move would appear measured, intentional, and aligned with broader goals. It was a chess game, with each step carefully calculated to anticipate responses, influence perception, and protect personal and public interests. Advisors reinforced the importance of optics. Every financial strategy, every public statement, and every philanthropic endeavor needed to communicate independence, credibility, and resilience. They studied previous royal transitions, cases of public scrutiny, and the behavior of high-profile families facing financial and reputational challenges. Lessons were distilled into actionable strategies. Timing matters, perception shapes reality, and narrative control is as critical as financial control. Simultaneously, Harry explored personal financial education. Understanding investments, tax implications, media rights, and philanthropic structures became crucial. It wasn't simply about securing funds. It was about mastering financial independence, understanding the levers of influence, and ensuring sustainability in the face of unpredictable challenges. Meghan encouraged this deep dive, emphasizing knowledge as both power and protection. Despite meticulous planning, uncertainty lingered. The denial had revealed vulnerabilities, emotional, financial, and relational, that could not be fully mitigated. The media frenzy continued, public speculation persisted, and familial dynamics remained unpredictable. Every move, while strategic, carried inherent risk. Yet this tension also fueled ingenuity. Harry and Meghan became more deliberate, more agile, and more resilient, recognizing that adversity often catalyzes both innovation and clarity of purpose. By the end of this phase, a clear blueprint had emerged. It included diversified income streams, carefully curated public projects, philanthropic initiatives with strategic resonance, and contingency plans for both financial and reputational challenges. The denial, while initially devastating, had sparked a process of strategic evolution, one that would ultimately redefine autonomy, influence, and resilience for Harry and Meghan. And yet, even with every plan meticulously crafted, uncertainty remained. How would King Charles respond if indirect strategies gained public attention? Would media scrutiny amplify successes or cast them as opportunism? Could influence be sustained without royal support, and at what personal cost? Every question loomed large, a reminder that strategy alone could not control every variable in a world as complex as the monarchy and media combined. In the wake of the royal denial, Harry and Meghan realized that strategy alone wasn't enough. Influence, after all, was not just about money or planning. It was about connections, alliances, and timing. To navigate the complexities of independence, media scrutiny, and family dynamics, they needed allies, people who could provide leverage, guidance, and strategic advantage. And not just any allies. They needed those with insight into both power and perception, capable of operating quietly yet effectively behind the scenes. The search for allies began immediately. Meghan, with her network from her acting career, philanthropic initiatives, and media ventures, played a critical role. She reached out to trusted confidants in media, business, and charitable circles, individuals who could offer both resources and discretion. Every contact was carefully vetted. Loyalty, influence, and discretion were non-negotiable. In a world where rumors spread faster than facts, trust became as valuable as capital. Harry, meanwhile, leveraged his unique position as a royal with global visibility. Former military contacts, philanthropic collaborators, and even acquaintances from past media projects became part of a calculated network. The goal was multifaceted: to secure financial backing for initiatives, to create channels for influence, and to ensure strategic messaging could be reinforced through credible and sympathetic voices. Each ally represented a node in a web of influence, carefully designed to extend reach without exposing vulnerabilities. One particularly crucial ally emerged from an unexpected quarter: a high-profile philanthropist with deep experience in both media strategy and global charitable work. Their role was subtle yet powerful, offering guidance on which projects would resonate publicly, how to structure funding for maximum sustainability, and how to frame public messaging to emphasize independence and impact rather than dependence or entitlement. This guidance proved invaluable, turning potential pitfalls into opportunities for strategic growth. The couple also cultivated relationships with media insiders. It wasn't about manipulation, it was about mutual understanding. Trusted journalists, commentators, and analysts were briefed selectively, allowing narratives to be shaped with nuance rather than distortion. Timing, phrasing, and framing became critical tools. Allies in the media could amplify successes, contextualize challenges, and subtly influence public perception without turning strategy into overt spectacle. Even within royal circles, potential allies were considered. Those with influence over advisory channels, ceremonial protocols, and family communications could provide insight, early warnings, or subtle support. While loyalty could not be assumed, careful observation and discreet engagement allowed Harry and Meghan to identify individuals who might act as buffers, conduits, or sources of intelligence. In a world governed by both tradition and discretion, knowing who to trust became as important as knowing what to do. Philanthropy also served as a strategic lever for alliances. By aligning with respected charitable organizations and initiatives, Harry and Meghan created networks of goodwill, visibility, and influence. Each partnership reinforced credibility, showcased commitment to social responsibility, and expanded their sphere of allies, both public and private. The ripple effect was profound. Influence grew not just through direct action, but through the perception of purpose, responsibility, and alignment with values respected by both the public and potential collaborators. Legal advisors became critical allies as well. They ensured that every financial maneuver, every contract, and every initiative complied with complex regulations while providing flexibility for future opportunities. Their role was both protective and strategic, ensuring that independence could be exercised without exposure to legal risk or public misinterpretation. Every ally in this sphere was a safeguard, reinforcing resilience in a world where missteps could have lasting consequences. Emotional support, too, was a form of alliance. Meghan's guidance provided not only strategic insight, but also personal resilience. Maintaining composure, confidence, and clarity under relentless scrutiny became a daily challenge. Allies who offered understanding, perspective, and reinforcement became essential in sustaining both morale and focus. In moments of doubt or tension, these trusted individuals helped Harry and Meghan navigate emotional currents as effectively as financial and strategic ones. As alliances solidified, the couple's strategy began to take shape in a more robust form. Financial independence, media management, and philanthropic influence were now supported by a network of trusted collaborators capable of providing insight, guidance, and leverage. Each ally extended their reach, protected vulnerabilities, and enhanced their ability to act decisively. Independence, once threatened by denial and scrutiny, began to feel achievable, not easy, but possible. Yet, with alliances came new challenges. Coordination required careful planning, secrecy demanded vigilance, and reliance on others introduced potential risk. Every ally had influence, intentions, and perceptions of their own. Miscommunication or misalignment could create vulnerabilities, misunderstandings, or public exposure. The couple had to navigate these dynamics with the same precision they applied to media strategy, philanthropy, and financial planning. In the end, the network of allies provided more than resources. It provided perspective, insight, and resilience. The denial of funds by King Charles, while initially a setback, became the catalyst for building a strategic, multi-layered support system. Each ally contributed to a growing capacity for influence, autonomy, and public impact, transforming limitation into opportunity. But even as the web of allies expanded, the most unpredictable variable remained: the palace, the media, and the global audience. Every action taken in collaboration with allies could generate consequences, interpretations, or scrutiny that were impossible to fully anticipate. The stakes were high, the pressure unrelenting, and the path forward fraught with both opportunity and risk. In the world of royalty, control over narrative is as crucial as control over finances. Harry and Meghan knew that the denial of $25 million was not just a private family matter. It was a story that could define public perception, influence allies, and impact future endeavors. The media frenzy surrounding the refusal had already begun, and they realized that